The path into the trees was supposed to rinse the noise from the skull, but the wood took sound and returned it changed. Leaves whispered with a tongue older than gossip, and the drip of unseen water kept time with a pulse I had not admitted was fear. I walked until the world narrowed to trunks like pillars and the musk of rot and rain. And then I saw it. A beech the color of old bone, its bark split with a name I knew as surely as breath. Beneath the cut, blood shone as if the tree itself had a heart. I touched the damp earth and it clung like a demand. Somewhere deeper, a bell pealed, one toll only, turning birds to silence as if the sky had forgotten how to speak. Between bowls, something antlered paused and waited. The path behind me felt farther than it should, the distance swelling like a lie. I told myself I would not be led, and still my feet found the stains that led inward. The fort's palisade rose from the fog like ribs from a shallow grave. Smoke crawled from gaps in the hall's thatch and brought with it the sour tang of tallow and old fear. I knocked mud from my boots and carried what I had found across the yard where men pretended not to see the stains on my hands. Inside, under warped beams, a steward measured me with the quick glance of someone who already knew the answer and wanted me to say it aloud. Bells lay on a trestle, mute, their ropes coiled like sleeping serpents. A map was pinned with bone needles. On it, charcoal marks clustered around the forest edge like bites. When I spoke of the tree, the room cooled. A promise passed between faces, not spoken, only worn like a wound. Someone had been carving more than timber. Someone had been feeding something that remembered the taste. They sent me to the healer, because blood calls to blood. And whatever had been poured at the roots needed a counterweight. Her house crouched under sod and herbs, a den of steam and glassy eyes from jars that held the winter's memory of leaves. She listened without interruption, only moving when the bell at her lintel sang of a draft, and then her hand closed over a pouch that smelled of iron and nettle. She did not ask whose hand had cut my name. She asked where the path tightened and where ravens gathered. When I answered, something in the room leaned toward us, the way a hound tilts its head at a familiar whistle. She bound a sprig to my stave and told me to keep walking until the wood refused me. If it let me pass, she said, the debt was not yet called in full. At the abbey, stone chilled even the tongue. Words left the mouth slower, like breath in winter. A novice fetched a codex with both hands as though it might bite. We sat beneath saints hammered flat in glass, their eyes ash blue, and traced lines that spoke of tribute and a king who would not rot. The script warned that names are doors, and a door cannot complain when it is opened. I felt the cut on the beach, burning at a length across my ribs, a memory grafted to flesh. When the bell in the tower tolled, the world held its breath. Pages ceased their rustle. Mice went still, even the candle flame steadied like a soldier at inspection. When the toll dwindled, sound returned all at once. Coughs, gulls from the river, the novice's nervous swallow. He underlined a passage and would not meet my eyes. Evening found me where the wood stares back at the fort and counts the torches. Clouds dragged their bellies across the hills, and the palisade creaked like a ship at anchor. I walked the catwalk with the bell rope looped over my shoulder, feeling the grain rasp through callus, and watched the road fold into darkness. In the ditch below, water gathered and stank of coins. Somewhere in that black seam between tree and wall, a single raven croaked as if pronouncing a verdict. I did not know whether to be grateful when the rope went light in my palm, the weight taken by a hand I could not see, or whether terror was the more honest answer. I pulled. The bell answered, a single brazen heartbeat, and the night drew still enough to hear my breath betray me. Out there, something listened, patient as winter. The abbey kept its secrets behind lime-washed walls and the smell of vellum so old it felt like dust, learning to breathe. In the cloister, echo made every footfall confess its weight, and a young keeper of books led the way with hands that trembled only when light crossed a page. He showed a chart of harvests and omissions, Letters marched like soldiers until they broke rank around a single word. Tie. The margins muttered about kings who do not sleep but wait, and about doors opened by the blade that writes a life into bark. He whispered that the bell can hush a power, not end it, and the hush will anger what is bound. When the tower struck the hour, swallows stitched the sky, then vanished into stillness so perfect it felt carved. When sound returned, it did so like a guilty man, all at once and too loudly, and the chapel candles guttered as if scolded. The healer's yard steamed where rain met ovens, and the air bit with mint and iron. She worked in a hush broken only by knife on root, and the soft clack of jars. When told of the marks multiplying along the border, she did not lift her eyes, only said that a broken promise ferments faster than wine and makes worse heads in the morning. She spoke of a time when the fort drank from graves and called it victory, and how a trophy never forgets the hand that stole it. She bound bitter herbs with thorn, pricked a thumb, and let one heartbeat fall into the bundle. The lesson tasted like nettle. Forest law is not the law of men, and bargains write themselves into bark, whether witnesses are present or not. She pressed the bundle into my palm and told me to return what was taken or else offer truth in its place. One path would bleed less, not least. They found the vacancy of a man where a man should have been. A cottage fire breathing to no one, a cup sweating by the door, and on the oak behind the well, a name cut wet and certain. Flies arrived faster than questions. The yard held signs of quiet struggle. Not enough to shout, enough to whisper. Boot marks ended where roots began. A child's toy lay upside down, watching the sky. The dog would not come closer than the threshold. The fort's men spoke in low, rope-burn voices as if loudness might summon the thing that finished what it started. I touched the letters and felt their heat like coals banked in ash. Those who carve for power do not carve gently. The wood had swallowed the strokes hungrily. When the sun slid behind a cloud, the carving freshened, glistening like a tongue wetted before speaking, and the air filled with the taste of pennies. The path narrowed to a mind's width and then widened into a hollow where trees had learned to lean together. There she stood, as if the wood had poured itself into a woman and decided to speak. Her hair held thorn and frost. Her eyes counted years the way foresters count rings. She named no price, only balance. Returned the gleam, torn from the grave, she said, and the roots would loosen their grip on the breathing. Fail, and the ground would correct the ledger by weight, not mercy. She warned that mock rites breed real monsters, that the mask worn for a jest confuse if sweat and fear soak it long enough. She made the sign of a circle, the old way of closing bargains, and would not let my hand fall until it was done. When wind passed through the hollow, the branches did not rustle. They nodded like judges. Night draped the fort with weathered cloth and left the corners damp. Word had moved faster than riders, doors barred, candles set low, and prayer muttered with teeth clenched. We laid the chart across the high table and added stones where names had been cut. The pattern curved toward the barrow mouth like geese to a winter lake. If a crown went missing, then a crown must return. Stones felt like weights on my chest as much as the map. The bell rope hummed with a draft that did not exist, and the tower's brass heart gave a shy knock as if reminded of duty. From the hill, the wood stared back with too many eyes. The healer knotted a second charm to the rope. The novice read a line aloud that made the fire fold low. We left no toasts, only promises that tasted of iron. The wind carried a single raven's answer, and it sounded like agreement. By afternoon, the green rose to laughter and barter, the kind that keeps hunger from sounding like prayer. Flags snapped on hemp lines. Flutes tried to outsing the crows. Masks waited on pegs. Boars and stags, saints with mouths sewn shut. Sold as jest, bought as license. I walked the lanes of bread steam and tannery reek, pretending the day was ordinary, while the ground kept the rhythm of something older beneath the drumbeats. The fair's master swore the rites were only play, Yet the circle chalked behind the ale tuns had been laid true, with salt at the quarters and a knife hidden under flowers. Children chased one another wearing antlers too big for their small will. Men who never knelt to law bent to touch a carved pole and rise lighter. When the sun tilted, the shadows of the masks did not fall where the bodies stood. It was a small thing, and that is how a large thing begins. At dusk, the play grew teeth. The circle filled with dancers who called it mumming, but their steps traced old geometry, heel to toe toward a pole crowned in ivy and wire antlers. Torches painted the world in honey and coal, while pipes stitched a tune that remembered a darker lyric. A voice led the chant with the easy courage of anonymity. The mask made it brave, and the crowd made it righteous. When the first cut was made, a goat, quick and almost merciful. The cheer had relief inside it, as though the blood paid coin for all our gathered fear. I watched hands move in patterns I knew from stories, not meant for feasts. Watched salt, poured widdershins, watched names whispered into the pole. Laughter covered the rest, but I heard the bell inside the wood answer from far away, not in sound but in the halt of every wing. Night arrived, and with it the certainty that someone meant to make the game into law. In the clutter behind the stalls, where empty kegs become chairs and secrets climb like ivy, a knot of men bared forearms to the torch. Not soldiers, clerks, drovers, a smith's apprentice, but each wore a token carved from heartwood, still oozing red sap that smelled raw. Their talk was low and sure. A new order that obeyed the older order, a lord who would not bend except to the root. I recognized the hunger that makes cowards brave and good men cruel. They had learned the half of a right and mistook it for the whole. They believed that writing a name into living bark is the same as owning it. The leader pressed a knife into a volunteer's palm and guided the cut on a stolen plank of beach. When the plank drank, his eyes went wide, the way a pilgrim's do at a miracle. I knew that look. I had worn it once where I should have kept my hands empty. The novice found me by the tannery vats where the stink made speech honest. He had run through mud and doubt to bring a line that would not let go of his tongue. The script warned that a name carved by other hands wakes when the moon stands full, and it wakes obedient to the hand that carved it. He showed how the letters tilt under a stranger's cut, how the wood heals around such shapes like a mouth around a bit. He trembled but kept his place, and I envied that courage. We laid palm against palm, the way soldiers swear, and I looked past him to the black wedge of the hill where the barrow waits. The sky's edge had already silvered. The coin of the moon would be whole by midnight. Every mark struck across the shire would draw breath. Then, if my name was written by another, the night would take me like a hawk from a hedge. When the fair turned riotous enough to pass for joy, I took my silence into the dark between hill and wall. Memory stepped where I did, uninvited, and the wood made room for it, like a host who dislikes the guest, but respects the rules. Years dissolved, and I was again on a winter patrol with a friend who trusted me to keep a promise I could not afford to keep. Snow had hidden a snare, and the snow drank what followed. I chose the living over the loyal, and left a name in the drift, as if that could keep it from the ledger. Wherefore, T.C. The wind wrote the scene fresh across the leaves until I saw how the debt had found me. Someone had carved the name I abandoned, but they wrote mine instead, and fed it with a grievance sharp enough to draw blood from a stone. The antlers appeared at the path's elbow, whether root or crown. They waited like judgment. Snow came early, first as a rumor in the wind, then as a lace of white that stitched the roofs and made the fort's timbers creak like old oaths. The chapel smelled of beeswax and iron, candles guttered before an altar dark with smoke. There, truth arrived without heraldry. Confession slipped from a dry throat and landed heavy, the way a stolen crown does when set upon a table not meant to bear it. The tale unwound. A ray into earth, a bright ring of metal torn from a skull that refused to soften. a younger hunger that called it justice. We stood with that weight between us and listened to the storm conduct. The bell roped through the rafters. One toll would hush the restless roots, but only briefly, and each hush taught them to wait better. The map we thought described a border proved to be a fuse. Outside, flakes turned to knives. Inside, the crown caught stray light and threw it back like a warning. We understood whose breath we shared. We walked out beneath a sky scraped thin by wind, snow needling cheeks, until skin learned silence. The hill that kept its dead had shed its modesty. Turf slumped in breaths, and frost steamed where earth should only sleep. I felt the bells quiet like a bruise under bone, its mercy brief, its cost deferred. The forest did not rage, it watched, and watching is worse. We carried fire and salt because men always have, and because old rules respect the attempt. At the mound's crown, stones knelt in a circle and leaned inward as if eager to hear. A seam ran from west to east, mouth closed but wet at the lips, and the air that rose tasted of coins left too long under the tongue. The healer bound my wrist with thorn and nettle to keep my blood where it belonged. The novice whispered a line that made the snow falter midair. When the seam opened, it did so patient as law. The passage breathed like a sleeping animal and exhaled our heat back at us in damp, cold sighs. Drips counted us inward, slowly, as though the earth kept ledger. Roots thick as wrists veined the ceiling. Thinner ones trailed like hair and brushed faces without consent. Our fire turned walls to pages, and the pages told of men who thought themselves kings, and of crowns that teach rather than adorn. The air pressed close, weighted with a sweetness that did not belong to flowers. Sap, but older, almost meat. Behind, the entrance shrank to a coin. Ahead, the floor sank to stone polished by knees. We moved by the arithmetic of fear. 3 breaths, then a step. Another 3, another step. The novice's whisper stumbled once, and then found its legs. The healer's charms rattled as though eager to prove their worth. When the tunnel bent, the light returned from somewhere that was not our torches. The chamber opened like a throat, and contained its own weather, a stillness so complete it made the ears ring. Thrones of root rose in a half-circle, each grown to the shape of a seated man. Upon them rested crowns of fungus and iron, and below them offerings rotted into scent. In the center stood a figure not yet finished, as if the wood were remembering a man and had reached the scar before the face. Ghost light bled from seams in bark. It cast no shadow but made ours flee. The bell above must have tolled, because for a breath the whispering in the roots thinned to a mere idea, and we stood inside a silence bright as steel. Then sound returned, sap trickle, a far raven, our own uncertain luck. My hand rose without asking and hovered near the thing's chest. Not an idol, a vessel. Names thrummed faintly, strings drawn tight across a hollow body. One of them matched the rhythm under my ribs. We did not linger. Knowledge has a temperature, and this burned cold. The way back felt longer, but the tunnel remembered us and let us pass, tasting with each brush of hair thin root. At the mouth, dawn had not yet decided to exist. The storm worried at its own bones, and the hill exhaled fog that smelled of iron and rain. We spoke quietly because the world seemed to be listening for names. The rule resolved itself like frost on glass. What was stolen must be returned by the thief, or failing that, by one who owns a truer word than metal. We bound cord to wrist and wrist to cord, a chain made of living choices. Behind us, the chamber stirred as if our footsteps rearranged its dreams. Ahead, the fort crouched under snow, holding a crown that had learned hunger. We set our faces to the wind and carried the cold between our teeth, knowing that confession was only the door. The walk through it would cost more than blood. The earth's throat widened into a hall, where breath dared not cloud the air. Seats grown from root and stone arranged themselves as if expecting judgment, and upon them lay the remnants of crowns that had learned to drink light instead of wearing it. In the center, the unfinished thing waited, no longer merely remembered by Timber, but remembering us in turn. It listened the way winter listens, without hurry, without mercy, while the drip of sap marked a slow procession of seconds that felt like a procession of kings. Words felt profane here, so we let the small noises speak. Leather shifting, a page trembling, the grind of a tooth against fear. The air pressed down until the ribs creaked. What we had carried as rumor hardened into law. The marks above ground fed what sat below, and the sum of every carved letter was standing up to greet its creditors. Somewhere far away, a bell found a single note, and the whole chamber drew it in like a lung. They were present without faces, elders in seats of root, each exuding the kind of authority that needs no gesture. Between them hung the stale perfume of burnt offerings and old pledges, and in that reek memory, unspooled, not as comfort, but as a writ. Shapes stepped out of the air made from breath and guilt, taking on the posture of those who had trusted and been spent. Their mouths did not open, yet accusations threaded the marrow. The floor's frost kissed boot leather and stayed. The hall wanted us kept. A rule surfaced from the cold, like a fish just beneath ice. Oaths are not cancelled by silence, only paused, and every pause accrues interest. The one who had taken the bright relic must bring it back with hands that admit the theft, or else a truer word must be spoken aloud, the kind that strips pretenses like bark and bleeds the tree clean. Even the drip slowed to listen for that word. Or even the drip slowed to listen for that word. From the tunnel's mouth came the sound of weather being cut by will. A figure stepped into the chamber like a clause added to a contract, bringing with her the odor of wet leaf and iron thorn. She did not bow to the seated dead. She counted them. Her words were not loud, but the hall bent to contain them. Balance, she said, is not mercy. Debt is a stone that rolls downhill unless a hand accepts its crush. She named the choices before us in the grammar of older courts. Return stolen breath in the shape of a crown, or lay down a truer name than any the knife has written. A name only the bearer dares to speak, the kind that becomes a door others cannot shut. She traced a circle with a twig that struck sparks against nothing, and the sparks hung like fireflies above the unfinished chest. The light showed how close the heartwood was to beating. We made a chain of glances and chose to stay. The chamber answered in kind, roots flexed underfoot, not to trip but to weigh, and the crowns on the thrones let fall a dust that tasted like coins sucked in childhood. The unfinished sovereign straightened and began to mouth syllables it did not yet own, pulling them from the carved letters we had seen in bark along the border. Each syllable tugged at flesh as if spoken from inside the bones. The young scholar's voice rose in counterpoint, a thin thread that did not break. He read the line that unmoors false obedience when a bell's reach fails. The healer's hands moved with battlefield calm, binding thorn to thorn, scenting the air with bitter green until the will to draw breath returned. The choice set its teeth. Call for a contrite hand that might never come, or wager everything on a word so raw it could unhouse the self that carried it. A tremor passed through the stone like a drumbeat from a buried army. Silence assembled itself like a council awaiting the vote. No bell would save us here. Its mercy ended at daylight and stone. The line of returning a bright theft ran outward through snow and spear and pride to a man still weighing the measure of his guilt. That road was long, and the hall's appetite was near. So the nearer door opened. A word rose that had lived in the throat for years without citizenship. A truth kept in the dark to keep other lights from dimming. To speak, it would break a smaller life so a larger life might stand. To swallow it would feed the king beneath our feet. Breath chilled as it crossed teeth. The law here accepted only full coin. No oaths wrapped in silk. No polite substitutions. The choice crossed from thought into muscle. Tongue lifted. The first syllable scraped the palate, and tasted of iron and rain. When it left the mouth, the hall's roots paused, mid-tremor as if listening for their own name. Snow hardened the ground to drumskin and carried the march before we saw it. A hush like held breath. Then the hiss of briar dragged across plank. Then the antlered shapes cresting the ditch as if the wood had decided to walk. Arrows checked and curved mid-flight, turning to twigs where they struck bark. Hounds made of thorn bounded in silence and only learned to howl when they found flesh. The bell began its work, each toll shaving the edge from the world until even fear sounded far away. But the silence cut both ways and left the hands clumsy. Saboteurs moved with certainty, born of rehearsal, knives ready for hemp and pitch for timber. The wall spoke in groans. Sparks took hold under eaves. Orders were gestures more than words. Water ran black with ash. A standard toppled and did not rise. In the melee's blind arithmetic, choices simplified to two: bar the gate and die slower, or open the way for a debt to walk out carrying its own weight. The tower held the bell like a heart, and drew knives as hearts do. Smoke climbed the stair ahead of footsteps that did not bother to hide. At the landing, rope hung in coils like sleeping serpents, and hands reached to sever them with the pitiless neatness of butchers. The first clash was steel on wood, the second, breath against breath. As men who hated for the cause of order met men who loved disorder, dressed as law. The chant below rose and fell. The tower swayed in the throat. A younger face wavered when confronted with its own reflection in terror. An older one did not waver at all. The book-bearer found a voice high but steady, and spoke a line that made flame hesitate. A blow landed where apology would later take root. Rope sang as weight returned, and the bell answered, not triumphant, simply awake. The tower windows framed the forest as if it were an audience waiting for its cue. It would not wait long. When the gate shuddered inward, the courtyard became a page on which weather wrote in ash and arrow. A chest was brought forth wrapped in cloth that had once been ceremonial and was now merely honest. It held a brightness that remembered hands. It wanted to go home the way a swallow finds its Eve. The one who bore it did not look at faces, but at distance, measuring ground in breaths and in regrets. A path was marked through the ruin, not secret, only swift, past the broken cart, under the splintered beam, through the gap where the palisade forgot to meet itself. The forest watched like a jury. The bell's hush loosened just enough for a vow to pass. Those who had played at old rights tried to claim the right to escort, eager to be seen at the edge of legend. They learned that courage is quieter than clamor. The weight in the chest altered the air. Frost crawled in its wake. The hill waited with its mouth politely closed. At the breach, Law wearing a borrowed face stepped out to intercept. Antler tokens flashed. A plank of beech, carved slick, was hoisted as if it were a saint's reliquary. They pronounced their candidate with the voice of men who have never been refused, and offered to place the bright burden where roots could teach it to obey them. The offer was treason, wrapped in liturgy. Words piled like logs. A spark leapt. The first arrow stitched a sleeve to skin. The second found an arguments period in a shoulder. The false ceremony tried to crown a boy who still mistook eagerness for strength, and the moment bent like wet willow. Choices ripen in storms. One did now. The staff-bearer stepped between crown and plank, taking for himself a path none could push him from. He named no name, but the shape of his refusal was the shape of a door opening inward. The wind swung it wide. The forest answered with a gust that smelled of copper and rain. The path from wall to hill redrew itself with every breath, yet the feet found it as if rehearsed in another life. Snow turned to needles, then to rain a color of sap. The ground flexed, letting pass those who came to return what should never have been taken. Thorn shapes paced the flanks and did not strike, as if curious to see whether we would keep our word. Behind, shouts pulled thin in the wind. Ahead, the mound's seam glowed with a patient ember. The bell fell away, a sound left on a shore as we crossed into deeper water. The old arbiter waited at the margin, eyes like weather, neither offering comfort nor refusing it. The chest's weight made time slow. A boundary was crossed that would not uncross. The one who had chosen the harder door lifted his chin and accepted how narrow the passage must be. When the hill exhaled, the air tasted clean and cruel. We went in, and the night bent like a bow. The hill accepted us with the indifference of a ledger and the patience of winter. Breath hung in the passage like surrender, each exhale signing a document we could not see. The chamber waited as before, but something in its geometry had sharpened. Thrones leaned, seams glowed, and the vessel of bark now held a rhythm that matched the world outside. The chest was set down with the care given to a sleeping child and a loaded trap. And in that moment, every whispering root became a witness. There was no speech grand enough for apology, and none small enough to hide it. Salt stung the tongue. Iron scented the air as the seal cloth fell away. A weight left the room, or perhaps entered, difficult to tell. When the circlet touched stone, the light within the wood narrowed to a point bright as a threat and, strangely, as a promise. Somewhere far above, wind combed snow into lines, like script. We were here to read it aloud, without lying. The crown knew its place the way a river knows its valley, and when iron met stone, the chamber inhaled. The air cooled, edges of breath feathering into frost, as 100 carved names tugged at their bearers. No bell guarded us now. This was the hour without witnesses and therefore the truest. He who had kept the bright theft spoke not to us, but to the dark that remembered him. Words fell like tools returned to a bench, each with the memory of misuse. He said the act, and the reason, and the cost, and the hill accepted none of it, only the fact. Roots flexed in assent or accusation. It felt the same. The vessel in the center lifted its head by the width of a leaf and listened with the absence of mercy that makes justice possible. Silence collected behind the last syllable and waited. Then the light within the bark changed direction, flowing backward along rings we could not count, and the chamber decided whether return was enough. A door must be opened from both sides, the old laws say. The crown was one hand, and the other had to be a word. The room pressed in until there was only the pulse in the throat, and the awareness of being made from promises kept and promises broken. The truth that had lived unspoken rose again, raw and bright, and this time it did not wait for courage to invite it. It came because the reckoning required it. The syllables scraped like antler on bark, pulled free of the places they had hidden. The confession of leaving a friend to winter and wolves. The admission that survival had been chosen over witness, that the name carved in the snow should have been borne home and was not. The room did not flinch. It was built for such things. When the last word fell, the vessel of bark turned its face fully, and in the new angle, we understood the shape it was taking. Not an enemy to be slain, an accounting to be balanced with blood or with truth, and truth had been offered. The hill answered with weather. Wind hammered the mouth of the barrow and drove a ribbon of snow down the passage. Torches bent and guttered, yet the ghost light brightened as if fed by cold. Roots loosened like hands recognizing a command they could finally obey. The thrones settled, the crowns on them shedding a final dust that smelled of wet coins and old leaves. The figure in the center stood to its height, and for a moment it wore the angle of those who rule. Then it bowed, not to us, but to the law we had invoked. The light in it went from hunger to clarity, and the names threaded through its chest broke like thawed ice. Something older than pity crossed the chamber and set a boundary. Those unmarked would walk free. Those who had carved would carry their carvings in open sight, and the ground would be tended with honest hands. The bell could hush again, but now it would toll for service, not siege. Outside, the storm began to forget its anger. Dawn did not break so much as arrive. An agreement signed in pale gold across snow and timber. The path back carried fewer shadows. The fort smoke rose straight, not skulking. In the yard, Men unbound ropes without glancing over shoulders, and the bell's voice carried like a work song. We set down no trophies. The crown returned to darkness where it belonged, and the hill kept its bargain as hills do, by being itself. At the beach, where the first cut had gleamed, sap ran clear as water, and the letters lost their heat, becoming only wounds that would close in time. No carving answered them. We left the bark untroubled, names remaining where they should be, inside the chest behind the ribs, spoken when needed, withheld when wise. The road that awaited was not softer, only truer. Winter would come again, as would hunger and fear, but the border between wood and wall had learned a new word: stewardship. We walked toward it, and for once the forest did not count our steps.